Greeting, everybody. Welcome to Chicago Living Corridors program this evening on native bumblebees in your yard. We'll talk a little bit more about the program, but first a little bit of introduction. My name is Peggy Simonson. I am on the board of Chicago Living Corridors and active with Citizens for Conservation in Barrington. Before we get into the program, I'd like to give you just a little bit of background about the technology as we're moving into it. Some of you have been doing this with us in our previous programs and know how it all works. Everyone right now is muted except those of us speaking. At the end of the program, we will unmute you if you want to ask a verbal question. But also, if you are having trouble with audio, note that on the right side of your screen, you have a series of little, there's a red arrow, but there's also an icon for the webcam and a little arrow for audio. So if that's an issue, just check and look up there. If, as we're moving along, you have any other kind of issues and you can get into the chat on the bottom of that screen, at the bottom arrow down there says chat, you can ask a question. We'd like to have you ask questions about the program as we're going along, and our speaker, Brandie, will respond to those at the end of the program. But if you have a technology question, you can ask at that time too. I also want to let you know that we are recording the webinar today, and we'll post that recording on the ChicagoLivingCorridors.org website in a few days. We don't get it up immediately, but we will email all of you attendees when it's available on the CLC website. So you'll know if you want to look at it again or if you want to refer other people to it who weren't able to get to the program this evening. And so just let me give you a little bit of background about Chicago Living Corridors. We are an organization that spans the Chicago area, and our mission is to focus on private property ownership, which is most of the land in Illinois. We have lots of forest preserves around us, most of whom are doing some good restorations, both prairie and woodland and wetland. But our focus is on privately owned property and trying to get more individuals to create quality habitat, to expand the habitat in the greater Chicago area. And we do that by working with residents to plant native plants. In some cases, we have individuals who are already doing so and want to be included in our habitat identification. In other cases, there are individuals who want to have help on getting started. And there are resources on the Chicago Living Corridors website about that. But I also want to tell you about the approach we use is to encourage individuals to join local conservation groups. Chicago Living Corridors itself is, oops, I went too far, is an umbrella organization. And so as such, we support the organizations that are actually out there working with individuals on their property. The founding organizations, as you see here, are Citizens for Conservation. We have a program called Habitat Corridors. The Wildlife Propagation and Preservation and Propagation Committee's mentoring program. It's called A Natural Garden in Your Yard in the McHenry County area. And the Conservation Foundation's Conservation at Home program is used by a number of organizations in the Chicago area. And then originally we also had the Northern Cane Wild Ones and the Wild Cook Wild Ones involved. These are still active organizations, but in addition, we now have these other organizations participating. So if you have a property that you would like to have assessed to be included in the habitat, the quality habitat in the area, it's appropriate to look for a program from one of these organizations. In addition to the founding organizations, these other ones are also doing that. And what happens is we have properties mapped on this map is available on the ChicagoLivingCorridors.org website, and the dots represent the organizations the different colors. So for example, I said I'm with Citizens for Conservation. We're these green dots around the greater Barrington Northwest suburb area. Conservation Foundation is these red ones all over the area. Anyway, there's all of these different organizations that we, when the property is assessed as good quality habitat, the organizations get their dots put on the map, or we add dots to the map. When you go onto the website, this map is interactive, so you can click, scan over it, mouse over it, and determine which organizations are where, and get more background information. So we encourage you to do that. This is just a screenshot right now, but it's interactive when you go on the Chicago Living Corridors, and it's under resources. So that's a little bit about who Chicago Living Corridors are. And so now I want to introduce you to our speaker for this evening. We have very, very glad to have Brandie Dunn with us. She's both a native bee expert and enthusiast, but also a photographer. And you're going to see, as you see even on this screen right now, some of her amazing photography that really helps understand the information that she's sharing about the bees. So she'll share her journey to attain all this knowledge. And in addition, she's initiated the Midwest Native Bee Alliance to call attention to the key role that native bees play in our ecosystem and the many challenges that they're facing right now. Brandie contributes citizen science data to, let me get this right, beespotter.org, bumblebeewatch.org, and iNaturalist, and volunteers with the McHenry County Conservation District, where she conducts photographic bumblebee surveys. So tonight you'll learn a lot about bumblebees and how to attract them to your yard. We're really happy to welcome Brandie to Chicago Living Corridors webinar series. So welcome, Brandie.
Thank you so much, Peggy. It's really such pleasure to be here, a privilege and an honor. I know a handful of people from my church who have dots on your map, and I really highly respect the work that you're doing as an organization. Thank you for this opportunity to speak for the bees in our neighborhood. So I'm gonna get going here and show you a squirrel that launched 1,000 pictures. Back in March, about March 19th, I was unpacking my disappointment, like along with everyone else, from a trip that was canceled that my daughter and I were going to go on for spring break, and we're all sitting at home for our stay-at-home order in Illinois, and I'm staring at this squirrel going, what am I gonna do? I'm stuck at home for who knows how long. And I just decided to start this thing. I called it my Backyard Neighbor Challenge. And I decided that from that day forward, I was just gonna challenge myself to take a picture of some different life form in my backyard. And I considered my backyard my own property that we're fortunate to have, 3/4 of an acre in a normal suburban kind of location. And but anything that I could walk to within walking distance from where I lived. And so this squirrel kind of launched that effort. And along the way, let's see, this would have been day 3, a little junco. We experienced a little snow that day. This is one of my favorite little birds, so precious. And I kept plants in the mix. Plants were certainly a part of the effort. They're life forms, and certainly was a pleasure to find the, actually, there we go, the lower right corner, a nice wild, wonderful, wild, beautiful patch of these pussy toe flowers that I'd never seen in such abundance. And I was just really quite astounded to see this in my own backyard. And so really, I didn't want to take myself too seriously. There was a turkey that gave me lots of trouble. My daughter and family can attest to this. I went out many times trying to get a decent picture of a turkey, and this was the best I could do. And so I had a little fun with it and compared it to a squatch, and I affectionately called it my squatch turkey. But really, all told, when it came down to the end of it, you know, like 70+ days of doing this and getting in this habit of intentionally taking a new photograph each day of some new life form. It just was such an eye-opener to me that it was a blessing to be able to share. Like every day I shared what my daily picture was on Facebook. I was getting really encouraging feedback from friends and family that they were delighting in the pictures I was sharing and what have you. But lots of interesting observations along the way, and it's nice to kind of have this record of that time in history where there's such uncertainty going on, and that time spent with family, just going on these daily hikes, getting outside, really was good for my spirit at that time when there was a lot of chaos going on otherwise in the world. And so I live in McHenry County, and about 10 years ago, I took this picture because I knew there was going to be some developing that went on this farm parcel that's like north facing up a very busy corridor in our community. And this is kind of what it looked like in 2019 when I took a picture. Lots of big box stores going in, lots of growth, and knowing this and having kind of this front row view of the sprawl occurring in my own backyard and neighborhood, it really kind of sends home the importance of our own backyards as sanctuaries for wildlife, and like all some of those I pictured before. Whoops, I think I'm gonna go back. But really, we're here to talk about bumblebees. I love talking about bees, so you'll have to excuse how geeked out I am about it. But really, I can trace it back to this crew here. My 4 kids, when they were little, they would catch and release bumblebees, sometimes with their hands, and even having one. Little Sylvia got stung one time, but she would just go back for more. It was just so amusing to me as a parent to see them and this love they all had for bugs and bees. And it kind of drew me into the world of bumblebees, and I started paying closer attention and began challenging myself with picking up my camera and trying to get better pictures of them along the way. And really, what's not to like about them? Like when you really take a closer look, when you just kind of spend a little time watching them, they're very charismatic. They're fuzzy little teddy bears of the bee world. They have a workaholic kind of tendency. They get up really early. They stay up really late. They're on a clearly defined mission, and they're really excellent at what they do. They're really the highest quality of all the pollinators, I would argue, and I've read that they're just so efficient at what they do. They excel at it. They're vegetarian, so what's not to like about that? They're not carnivorous. It's kind of endearing. They're Amazonian feminine kingdom ruled by a queen where the males don't sting, and that's true. The male bumblebees don't sting, and they're at the queen's service. That's kind of endearing as well. They don't see the color red, which also is endearing because you think of that as like a color that is anger and but they do have this like ultraviolet superpower where they can see the UV spectrum of light. And before they were called the bumblebee, there was this period of time where they were referred to as the humble bee, and even back further, the Dumbledore. But the humble bee is, I don't know, to me, that's just such a very endearing title for this bee. And I love that it's just kind of this reminder to stay grounded, to not, I don't know, just to stay humble, to keep it humble. So, but if I'm really being honest, the honeybee was a gateway bee for me. If I look back into kind of my history of bee chasing, I can kind of look back to when my neighbor had hit this hive that he adopted. There was a swarm that appeared in his tree. He decided to somehow corral them, and for about 3 consecutive years tried keeping bees. And I went over and snapped some pictures, and I was really, of course, drawn into their world. It's very fascinating. And at the time, there was so much in the media about colony collapse disorder, and really I had kind of this of the bee problem. This is the bee I thought of. I really didn't necessarily at the time start connecting it with other bees besides the native besides the honeybee. And so consequently, I had to kind of fit a meme in here, you know, just to be a little more current. This is true for, I don't think I was alone. I think collectively, many people, when they think of bees and the bee problem, really just imagine the honeybee, and that helping the honeybee is going to be the only course of action. But it's really kind of at the detriment of our native bees, who need our attention and they need our support right now more than ever. And so to just illustrate that, this was a check that I'm still a little old school. I write checks, and this is actually the checks I use. And that is a bumblebee, a picture of a bumblebee, but they call it the honeybee check, where there features 4 scenes of honeybees pollinating plants. There's really a lot of confusion out there when it comes to even what, you know, other bees besides the honeybee. There's such a fixation there. So if you kind of join me in maybe declaring that in 2020 and beyond, from this day forward, I really believe this should be our collective gateway bee that we are emphasizing and talking up and you know, putting our resources into more. This is the rusty patch bumblebee, and it's a worker that was visiting the Joe Pye weed in my backyard last year. And this is a bee species that has experienced 87% decline in a very short period of time. In 2017, Xerces Society put forward the petition to have them listed. Well, prior to that, they petitioned to have them listed, and in 2017, they were listed as an endangered species. And the amazing thing is, if you look at their range, which has shrunk from 3/4 of what it used to be, our neighborhood here, if you know, I'm not sure of the, I'm assuming everyone tuning in is from the Illinois region, but you could very well see them in your backyard. They are still found in parts of northern Illinois here, but a lot of their range is just diminished at this point, or they haven't made any appearances. And really 28% of all the bumblebees in Canada, US, and Mexico are at this point IUCN threatened, which is very concerning because that's a huge number. And so our bumblebees are pretty much, they're in trouble. They're in trouble. So if you look at worldwide, there's 250 various bumblebee species, 47 north of Mexico. In Illinois, we've got 11. And that's of 18 historically that have been collected over the last 15 years. And really, of those 11 that we still have showing up in our state, 3 are considered endangered or threatened. So they're just not trending well at this point, and there's certainly something to be concerned about. But why really care about our native bees, of which bumblebees kind of are in that umbrella? 40% of the bee species are declining or threatened with extinction, 700 in North America. They provide the bulk of our pollinating of our native plants, which is significant. If you can imagine how important of a job that is. Obviously, you know, we're all native plant fans here, and that is a significant thing that they provide to us. And we'd be looking at ecosystem collapse if this keystone species, which bees are, if we were to lose them. And so that would send ripple effects through our ecosystem with all of the other wildlife that it would impact. There is economic value and enhanced yields in agriculture that we know that they provide. If you have 10% of a farm field that's converted to a variety of pollinating plants that provide forage for our pollinators, there's proof that that actually benefits the yields in agriculture. But the economic value is in the billions. I've seen multiple numbers thrown around, so it was hard to kind of settle on it. But I've seen significant in the billion number in terms of an economic value that they provide to us. And really sole dependence on honeybees is very risky, so they do provide an insurance policy. Native bees historically have been very significantly underfunded. A lot of the funding, of course, goes to honeybees, which we really certainly need that research. Don't get me wrong, I may come off a little anti-honeybee, but I certainly know we need them. We need the research to help them along as well. But we could use some also on the native bee side a little more at this point. And the quality of life, it's a quality of life issue. We really need our native bees. They're a gift to be treasured. So don't worry about this bee. It is not sick. It was just very cold after a rainy day. But why is this happening? Why are all of our bees having, our bumblebees in particular, having such problems? And I really can't go into all these. All of these deserve their own 40-minute talk. But just to kind of hit quickly on it, we know because of habitat loss, fragmentation, and that it's poor nutrition. And there is a competition that happens with invasive species or non-native species, of which you consider the honeybee. They do compete. I've observed it myself in the field. The pesticide problem, it's just something that there again, it needs its own whole time to talk about the extent. We're pretty behind some other countries that are a little more forward thinking in terms of banning certain neonicotinoids that are causing clearly, devastating consequences in our bee populations. Pathogens, parasites, Nosema bombi is the one that is at the forefront of the problem that Bombus affinis, the rusty patch, is facing. It's just something that creates significant problems for them with the spores. It's like, I think it's a fungus, and it gets in and creates spores that just make it hard for it to even procreate. It's like bee diarrhea. It's just nasty and bad, and it's unfortunate that it's spreading to the extent it has. And of course, climate change is significant in the way things are shifting. It's definitely impacting our bees, and they're really not adapting well to all these things going on. There are definite concerns there. So what am I going to suggest here is like first part of the solution to this, all this kind of doom and gloom that I'm talking about, which want to stay hopeful, I heard John Asher, who's a bee expert over in Singapore, who studies bee diversity on a global scale. And he said bumblebee watching or bee watching and bee native bees are kind of where birding was in the 30s and 40s. We could benefit from more organization and integration. And if you think about Audubon and how it's very well organized, there's birding groups. We could use more bumblers. We could use more people getting excited about native bees and bumblebees and getting together and talking about solutions. And this, just have to point out that my husband is like my bumblebee bodyguard when I go on some of these surveys. And for his birthday, I did get him this extremely close focus binoculars, and it's been a wonderful thing. He comes along on these surveys with me, and he's able to see these fast-moving targets in much more detail, right up close and personal. And so I highly recommend, if you don't have that kind of binoculars for extreme close situations, especially since they are moving targets, they're significantly smaller than birds, they are harder to see, but it's really worth it if you make the effort to try to take a closer look at them and some of their details. So when you're chasing them around with your camera and trying to get decent pictures, you're looking at their face and the shape of their face. These are all clues: the color of the hair on their face, the color of the hair in between their head and their thorax. There's clues that kind of add up to helping you along in your bee identification. So you really need to have the bumblebee in your heart before you can find it in the bush. So you really, my suggestion is to just take a closer look, figure out the name of the bee. Just start with one bee, work your way along, and you'd be surprised how fast you get at improving your ID skills the more effort you put in. And so it's fun just chasing them around with the camera. You're looking at these stripes, the turgia, what's going on in terms of color, how many there are. You're looking at the thorax here. See this Bombus providus, it's a yellow bumblebee, has this very distinct black stripe on its thorax. So these are all clues, and a lot of times, sometimes I need to get multiple pictures of the same bee to be able to, you know, feel confident in the identification that I'm turning into these various sources. So side profiles of the bees is super helpful. In this case, the more you go around chasing them, and working on identifying them, you get better at telling who the boys are and who the girls are. And every season that I'm out in the field, I'm getting a little bit, you know, fine tuning and getting a little better. So in this case, these are both female bees. This is a brown belted bumblebee, and this other one on the right is I believe that's a Bombus bimaculatus, which is a two-spotted. But just to keep us guessing and to keep you kind of on your toes, the boys do look different. And so Bombus bimaculatus on the upper right, that's a male, will present with different colors. And so there's definitely resources I'm going to be pointing you toward that if you really go down this rabbit hole like I have, that can help you along in your identification. Interestingly, over here, this Bombus griseocolus, or a brown belted male or drone, they demonstrate this interesting behavior called perching. When they're looking for their lady, they perch on top of something facing always kind of the same direction, and they're waiting for the queen to kind of come by and then pounce on her. And I was I heard in multiple sources that there was one found all the way on the top of the Empire State Building, perched up there waiting for his lady, which I thought was kind of sweet. But I guess they've got about a 1 in 7 chance of hooking up with their lady. And so clearly I'm saying, you know, get on board, become a citizen science. Our state of Illinois has this wonderful thing that U of I has put out called Bee Spotter, where you can take your picture, log in, upload your picture, just try to fine tune and identify what what kind of bee it is. And then an expert will come along and verify what that bee was. Bumblebee Watch is another place I've also submitted pictures, and the same kind of thing, same concept. You just kind of might have to wait a little while, especially during field season when the experts are out in the field. It might take a little while for them to kind of get back to you with an answer. And sometimes you really, really want to know what kind of bee that was. I mean, that's kind of how I am. And so I found myself also posting on iNaturalist because I'll get feedback maybe a little bit faster, but I still encourage you to participate in these other citizen science programs. And they have excellent tools, excellent resources on their websites that give you identification keys that can help you also along. This is kind of the Bumblebee Bible that I have, that it's very well worn. I've got my nose in it all the time, because there's all these different color morphs and different ways that certain species can present that keep you guessing. And they don't just look one way, you know, sometimes there's different variations, and this book has just been super helpful. Other citizen science programs I'm going to hit on a little later, it would be Queen Quest, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. And so I'll just quickly run through some of the usual suspects that you might see in your backyard. Really the most common bee is, of course, the common eastern bumblebee. And you know, even today I had a huge amount of them in my backyard, all over my asters, and they're all the boys. They're just all the drones, just waiting for a queen to come along, I guess. But they have this one each line on their abdomen is called turja. So to kind of shorten it, they call it T1. And so up here, this yellow stripe is considered T1. And so Bombus impatient is very easy to identify because it's probably one of the only ones that distinctly has just T1 as yellow. But you'll also notice that its thorax doesn't have a really dark black hair. It's very kind of pale, and the pile on their hair is very short and even. Another one you'll see quite often in our neighborhood is the brown belted bumblebee, Bombus griseocolus. And you definitely will see, you know, in most of them, this brown on the T2, on the second turja, and then directly under that, you're going to just see black. And oftentimes this can be confusing. Some people might see this and think, oh, it's a rusty patch, but no, it's, you know, you definitely want to be looking. I'll tell you how to identify that one later, but this is definitely black under that brown. You know, it's a brown belted. And you also see that it has on its thorax a very defined black spot. That's also a clue, as well as a black tuft of hair that, if I had a better picture, you could see this black tuft of hair. Bombus bimaculatus, the two-spotted bumblebee, is also fairly common. I've taken lots of pictures of them along the way, and they have a definitely, if you look at the tuft between their head and their thorax, it's most often it's definitely yellow. So that's one clue for them. Their hair is a little longer, and their T2 has this black spot on both sides of it. You can kind of see where my arrow is. And if you were to see a back view of it, it almost looks like a little W on T2 of yellow coming down. And that's Bombus bimaculatus, two-spotted. Bombus oricomis is also like this very robust, beautiful bee, loud. If you ever were to encounter a queen, they've got this very long face, and always kind of this yellow, most of the time a yellow tuft in between the head and the thorax. And if you look at their thorax, it's a very wide line of black that you'll see between the wings. And you go on, it's not really the best picture for identifying, but you know, it's very big, and you kind of definitely take note when you see one or hear one. But you'll see a little bit of black on the T1 surrounded by yellow. Bombus citrinus is one of two cuckoo bees, bumblebees, that occur in Illinois. And really what they do is they go and usurp the nest of a queen of the other species I've listed, Impatiens bimaculatus or vagans. They'll kick out the queen and take over the nest, and then the workers that nest had start doing all the work for her babies, and similar to cuckoo birds. And so you can tell them by these little, they do vary a lot. So I'll just say that this one you can tell because of these yellow lines. It's kind of a clue as to what that one is. They also have, they don't have workers, so you'll never see any of them carrying pollen, or they have a furriness to their hind legs. Bombus vagans is called the half-black bumblebee, and they're a little more rare than everybody else. Like if you were to look on iNaturalist and do a little search for bumblebee species in Illinois, which is a great feature of the iNaturalist site, you can kind of see what bumblebee species have been reported, and you can enter various aspects to searches. And they kind of show up lower down the line of all of the 11 species in the state. So they are a more rare site. They've basically got T1 and T2 showing up with yellow on them. And my understanding is they occur a little later in the season, like after May. And they have just a lot more shaggy-like appearance to their hair. I'm actually still, you know, I'm still a student of this. I'm still learning, but I'm starting to kind of get a little bit of a better feel for that particular species when I see it. But there are other species that have similar features of it that make it a little trickier to identify when you see it. And then Bombus you know, I never know if it's Furvitus or Furvitus, but it's the yellow bumblebee, and it is a red listed species on IUCN. And you can tell them, they're really a beautiful bee when you see them. I just love watching them go over thistle, which they seem to really be fond of. But as you see, they've got T1 through T4 are yellow stripes. So they, and their wings look a little bit darker. They've always typically got this black bold stripe right there. Their face is going to be black. There is another species similar, Bombus borealis, that if you're trying to identify between the two, because it kind of looks similar, borealis has yellow on its face. But the final bee I'm going to leave you with, and these weren't all of them, I couldn't really feature all of them, but I just thought I'd hit on these particular ones. But Bombus affinis, the rusty patch bumblebee, which we've talked about, you know, their T1 is typically yellow, and then you'll see this rusty patch on the second turjaw, and you'll definitely note yellow underneath the rust. So not like our brown belted where it was black right under the brown. In this case, if brown is under the yellow, report the fellow. And it's helpful to report that to U.S. Fish and Wildlife if you were to spot one. So really, how can what kind of would the next step be if you're out there chasing bees and you're now a citizen science? I would suggest taking inventory of your own yard, do like a habitat assessment in your own yard, and try to kind of get a feel for what the lay of the land is, and put out a good spread for your bumblebees to attract them, so you can take some pictures right in your own backyard. So really you're gravitating toward plant choices that support the most life. There's just an awesome website called Native Plant Finder. It's a feature on the nwf.org website, and everything in it that they suggest, it gives you how many species that plant will support. So I highly recommend checking that out. Morton Arboretum is a great source too for trees and shrubs and woody shrubs. It's a great place to start when you're putting stuff out into your yard. Typical suburban landscape has 20 to 30% native plant species, and we're trying to reverse that to 70 to 80. I kind of went fast there, sorry. You need to reverse that to 70 to 80% native species from local genotypes. And that's information from Annie S. White, PhD, from pollinatorgarden.org. So offer a diverse array, and they might stay. If you put out 10 to 20 carefully chosen native plants, that's a great place to start. I'm kind of a numbers person, it helps. I've just done this slowly over time. I'm still a work in progress, and every year I just make a point of trying to put something new, even if it's just an elderberry shrub this year, whatever I can do. I'm just making steps towards just trying to round out the buffet for the bees that visit my yard. You're looking for continuous bloom, early spring to fall, in a variety of shapes and sizes and colors. And microclimates are a huge plus. So if you have layers in your landscape, you're giving habitat to the birds, as well as, you know, on a windier day, a microclimate will offer them maybe the opportunity to forage in some areas that are less windy. So trying to go for 3 blooming at one time. Another thing to consider is trying to do large patches of a particular planting in groups of 5 to 7 or more of a species of plant, because the way bees like to forage, they don't just, if you put out just a random mix of seeds and everything was randomly established, they much prefer to gravitate toward patches of blooms. And considering a pollinator-friendly lawn is something I'll talk about in a little bit. So, and if you don't have a yard, if you're in Chicago and you're in an apartment, I grew up living in apartments in Berwyn, of all places. And if you just don't have a yard, there still are other ways you can get involved in your community and plug in with local groups doing restoration work and learn a lot that way. So really can't go into all of these specifics, but this is kind of like an initial spring option, some spring options in terms of trees and shrubs and forbs to consider. I've noticed just in my bee chasing, roses are so popular. If you can, you know, put in some native roses, that would be something I just can guarantee they will show up for, because they love that. And they do this wonderful thing called buzz pollinating, something like the shooting star in the lower right there. Only bumblebees can buzz pollinate, and it's using this wonderful way of like disconnecting their muscles in their wings, and they grab on with their, I don't know, with their pinchers and then they shake out the pollen, and it's really just something only they can do. And it's my understanding about 8% of all of our native plants benefit from that type of specialized pollination. But that's just kind of a little glimpse at spring bumblebee favorites. This is a time when queens wake up and they really, really benefit from nectar to fuel up and pollen that certain species of plants provide them, like willows and roses. And so, all right. Late spring bumblebee favorites. There's a window of time when things quiet down, and you'll notice that, you know, you start getting maybe a little concerned you're not seeing bees. Even this year, I got calls from people saying, I haven't seen any bumblebees. And there really is a little window of time after queens emerge, and then they bed down and get their nests established where they kind of lay low. But during this in-between phase where all the initial spring blooms start to fade out, there's kind of a gap. And then I've noticed that at least Bombus griseocolus gravitates towards the common milkweed in my yard. And you know, I've slacked off on yard treatments in my community, and I've noticed there is a lot of activity on the on the dandelions. It's got a very rich nectar and pollen source, and I know it's kind of controversial because some people really like their lawns tidy, but if you can relax a little, even in the backyard, allowing for clover to grow in, mowing a little less often, the bees will thank you for that. And so if you look at the lawn industry, 40 billion a year we tend to spend on our grass with 40 million acres of turf. And grass only, like when we go after all those everything, you know, all the clover, get rid of everything, really is, of course, we know it's a monoculture. It doesn't support any bees whatsoever. And in this study that Marla Spivak did from University of Minnesota, just going and making the effort to install a bee lawn, and just including clover, self-heal, creeping thyme, etc. These things brought in 61 different species of bees. That really inspires me to try to modify my approach in my yard a little bit. So early summer bumblebee pleasers, definitely, they go gaga over purple coneflower, the pale, all the different coneflowers. They really go after that hard when it starts to come in. And some of these, yeah, I've put little stars by. If you see stars, it means it's an immune boosting bloom, including the foxglove, beard tongue, and clover is a rich pollen source that they just love it. And don't forget to look into shrubs and trees that are good options at this time as well for the bees. Late summer, everything's kind of, there's so many options here. What can be said? I just have experience, you know, with Joe Pye, of course, that's what the Rusties showed up for in my yard. They really do love Joe Pye weed. And hyssop has been a heavy hitter too. The picture on the bottom there is also a rusty patch that I took a picture of at our church that I'll be talking about later as well here. But they love Monarda fistulosa. That they just absolutely love that plant. I just bought a whole bunch from a native plant sale that the Land Conservancy did. But there's so many options to definitely consider. There's got to be something for you in your yard that you can put out there. And of course, fall, right now, my asters and goldenrod are definitely covered with Bombus impatiens in particular, the common bumblebee. And it's just so fun to see them taking their little naps, and this little guy on the right with that. But certainly don't overlook thistles. The native thistles are a huge attractant, especially for some of the more threatened species like Bombus virvitis. I certainly would like to figure out a way to get some of that in my yard, but I haven't yet. All right, so now that you've kind of put out the spread, you've wined and dined the queen, she needs a place to chill. And so you have to think about what kind of habitat she's gonna wanna get cozy in and sleep through the winter. Because really for this wonderful chart that Heather Holm put together, illustrates that the queens right now in our yards and backyards in our region, they're all bedding down and overwintering. And this is something still kind of mysterious that our researchers are trying to find out more about and kind of unlock some mysteries there. But we know they overwinter and then they're down for 6 months in torpor until they emerge in the spring. And that gyne, which is the new queen that's coming out of the nest, will emerge in the spring, and she will be the only existing member of that previous hive that her and the other gynes that hive produced. But she'll be the only representative of her species, and that's why it's critical to get the spring forbs and trees and shrubs out for them to forage on. So like I said, we're still learning a lot about what they do when they overwinter, and I've taken some of this information from queenquest.org. This was right here, there she is. This was a queen, Bombus viridis, that I saw in the spring, and at the time I don't know if this was nesting behavior or if this is where she had just woken up from overwintering, but needless to say, it was in this leafy area that she was looking around. They like loose soil, mossy ground cover, loose leaf litter, and near structures like root masses and the base of trees. But anecdotal information on QueenQuest for overwintering, apparently they gravitate towards under pine trees is an option. Let me see. Most queens were found less than 3 inches, so they really don't go down very deep. They don't stay in the nest that they came from. They find their own little place and get bedded down in either leaf litter, loose soil, or duff. So this is just really emphasizing how critical it is to leave things a little messy in some areas in your garden to accommodate them for overwinter if possible. So slope surfaces are common from anecdotal reports that on QueenQuest, and I would say I've observed a little bit of that as I've been out bee chasing. My husband on the bottom left there. Our first queen this year was a Bombus bimaculatus, and it was in this area where it's a little bit of a slope and kind of a grassy, thick area where I don't think it's subjected to burns ever in this part of our neighborhood. And so the queens seem to gravitate towards that. And I've put the QueenQuest Blitz on here. You know, I say go to that website and kind of investigate that further. We're in an area where rusty patch bumblebees could be found. So we may not want to participate in this Blitz, but if anybody's listening who's outside of the high potential areas where you would find a rusty patch, then you may want to consider participating in the QueenQuest Blitz that's taking place coming up here. And that date may be wrong. I think it might, yeah, I think that might be a typo, sorry. Contact me if you want further information. So for nesting, they like underground, abandoned rodent nests, clump forming, undisturbed, native grasses, unmowed, ungrazed, not subject to controlled burning kind of places, tree roots, brush and compost piles, dry cavities above the ground, bird nest boxes, tree cavities. I think I said that, yeah. But anyways, there's still a lot that we're learning. So if you ever happen upon a bumblebee nest, I'd recommend reporting it to queenquest.org. You can contact me too, because I'm very eager to take pictures of bumblebee nests. I know that's kind of like the new frontier. It's a little more risky, and but I'm very interested in that. So some final little bit of land management advice is to just leave those stems, leave the leaves, save the stems, leave all your perennials intact for the winter as habitat for native species or various wildlife in your yard. And then come spring, cut things down between 8 inches to 24 inches and use the trimmings as mulch. And really resist the urge. I know this is so hard because I've struggled with it myself, resist the urge to spring clean until the temperatures are above 50 for several days. I've heard 12 even, but you know, usually mid-May. Sometimes it's very tempting just to burn your burn pile and burn and clean things up and get rid of all those leaves. But they may still be sleeping. You just don't know. So why take any chances and just leave it there a little longer so that you know they have a chance to emerge. And as we talked about already, shrink your lawn as much as possible. I know Doug Tallamy has talked about 50% reduction in what your lawn is now. That would just make such an impact for our wildlife and for the bees. So certainly cutting back on weed and feed is a huge plus, and I've done that and seen results in my own yard. And mowing less often helps. So if you do any kind of burning on your property, then Xerces Society, with some material that I was reading, talks about just doing it in thirds. So a third of the habitat patchy. And I even heard Rich Hatfield from Xerces Society suggest waiting until the winter for your burns or after a hard frost, that actually gives the queens the best possible chance of living through that. And so other land management ideas might be to collect and share seeds and once you get good at growing native plants. And on the bottom left here, going with less mulch. I've been trying to do this in my own space, and I've seen results. I've definitely seen more bees using the bare ground and making homes there for them. And because really, when you look at native bees, 70% make their home in the earth, and it's really helpful to them and beneficial to leave space in the soil, patches of soil open for them. So I guess I'm just going to come right out and say, let's try to think outside of the honeybee box. Another management strategy that I'd like to suggest, because honeybee keeping has been very trendy and there have been increases worldwide by 45% over the last 50 years. And so we've seen this real surgence of popularity, because I think the heart behind a lot of people going into it could very well be that they think they're helping the bees. I certainly felt that way years ago when I was wrestling with this issue myself. But the more I've kind of learned, the more I've become interested in, our native bees and supporting them along the way. Honeybees are not anywhere near endangered at this time. There are concerns, but they are not endangered. On the native bee side, we do have concerns about several species, and certainly the rusty patch has been listed as endangered. So I say become a backyard bumblebee keeper instead. So just to kind of pound that point home a little bit harder, how many flowers does it take to make 1 pound of honey? 2 million flowers just to make a pound of honey. This little picture on the left is another little rusty patch I spotted in my friend Pat's wonderful wild yard, who I know through WPPC. And it was really exciting to see that little guy there. And honeybees do have a negative impact on our endangered bees that we're concerned about. And this is a quote from Elaine Evans of the University of Minnesota. Before you consider going into beekeeping, she says, you need to work on becoming a habitat restoration, garden expert, or community activist, getting lots of habitats out there for the bees in these areas surrounding where you live. So I can't echo that enough. I certainly agree with her on that. So in our neighborhood, this might look different for you wherever you're from. This is a whole group right here of organizations I've personally had experience with in McHenry County. It was just a wonderful myriad of beautiful souls, beautiful people, hard at work in our community doing restoration work, mentoring people, answering all your questions that you might have about native plants, doing habitat assessments in your yard to help you further advance your understanding of working with native plants. Really wonderful groups of people doing restoration work, and I can't say it enough. I actually find going to restoration days, work days, fun, like, you know, picking up sticks. It's exercise with a purpose. It's a beautiful thing. So, and it's good to get outside. And so finally, I talk about Midwest Native Bee Alliance, which I just saw this need to like do more expos to speak on behalf of Native bees to represent them. And Alma here on the lower left is my bumblebee soul sister. She is like the true bumblebee superhero that I certainly look up to. She's doing research on the rusty patch bumblebee through University of Illinois and is a grad student there investigating the rusty patch, and I've had the privilege of following her around with her net and watching her do her thing. But I'm really in the infancy with Midwest Native Bee Alliance. We could use some more people to join me in this effort and to continue educating other people and advocating on behalf of our native bees. And I'll leave you with this project we did at Meadowland Church, at the church that I attend. We received a grant from WPPC for the outdoor classroom grant, and we were able to convert over 1,000 square feet of space on our property into native plants. We kind of tried to empower the youth in this process. We had 39 volunteers that turned up to help organize everything and take out a bunch of buckthorn that we had on our site. We tried to plan, as I talked about, for continuous bloom from early spring on through fall, and we had that in mind when we did it. Even the littlest of kiddos helped us. It's such a beautiful thing to see everyone pitching in as a community and getting behind this idea of planting native plants at our church. And we had an educational component where we educated the congregation, we educated the kids. The kids in Sunday school came out and helped us do the planting of the native plants, and they learned why we picked those particular plants. And I always have to say, just try to disregard the pear tree that needs to come out there that the original landscapers kind of put in, because it's non-native. But it was just so awesome to just see the congregation after one Sunday, after hearing from Betsy Zarko about all of these plants and why we're doing this and the heart behind our project, just getting on board to help install all of the plants that we were given. And we labeled them, and the first year we started seeing appearances of signs of life, life-affirming connections were made with kids that noticed these things. And this was someone who made an appearance in 2018 when we did the project. So hopefully you can see it, but that was, like, to my astonishment, it was like a divine appointment with this bumblebee. It was a rusty patch. We had multiple rusty patches show up the first year on our hyssop right there. So it was a beautiful thing to be a part of that and to have the knowledge going in and just to see that and recognize how special it was when it happened. Let's see about this. So then 2019, you kind of fast forward, things are filling in a little. We've had little monarch appearance there that day with the young lady discovering how cool that was. And this year's obviously been a lot different. We've had church from home and more remote kind of church, but I have snuck over there and I took this picture of this one is a lemon cuckoo, one of the cuckoo bumblebees. And then I did notice, you know, I'm really not trying to pick on the honeybees, but there was a lot of honeybees on the hyssop over there the day I went there. And thankfully it's feeding everybody in the neighborhood, so that's good. And so what's to become of the rusty patch bumblebee? You know, at this point, the trends and the numbers just are very concerning. And you know, I'm going to remain hopeful, but I will be mourning the loss if you know, if they continue on this trend. It'll be kind of like not getting to hear my favorite song ever again. because it really is something special if you have the joy of discovering one in your backyard or neighborhood. So if I were a doctor and summarize this whole thing, I'm going to just say the doctor's prescribing some outdoor time for everybody. Just spending time outside, getting out there, getting your hands in the dirt, going for a walk in your neighborhood, working on a restoration work day, time outside. This was such an interesting study because this guy, Aaron Schwartz, analyzed 100,000 tweets. And he discovered that there's a spike in happiness that occurs after visiting a park. And this afterglow can last between 1 and 4 hours, which is pretty cool because all the tweets after somebody went to a park were on the positive side. And so it tended to make people more positive, less self-obsessed. These are all things that I think our society could need right now and benefit from a little more time outside. And so there's some pictures of some of the other visitors I had. And on the last day of the stay-at-home order, when things started to open up again in our state, this was kind of the last picture I took of a bubbling bee. And it really kind of, you know, I guess captured the heart of why I did the Backyard Neighbor Challenge in the first place, which was to really just tap into your sense of wonder and to lead you down a trail of curiosity, to ask more questions and to just be open to that and open up yourself to where that takes you. So I think that's about it. I kind of went over time a little, but these are just some recommended resources that I suggest checking out. And I thank you for this opportunity.
Iris,
Peggy,
there I am. Okay, I'm unmuted.
go ahead. Sorry.
Thank you so much, Brandie. That was great, and I think you probably have some converts from your enthusiasm sharing it with us.
I hope so. Thank you.
Iris, I need the screen. Oh, there we go. Oh, there's some more resources. Here's some other suggestions, really reaffirming what Brandie has said. We definitely want you to plant natives, but also be ambassadors and spread the word. Chicago Living Corridors has a pretty active Facebook page. Carol Rice posts all sorts of wonderful, interesting information on there. Or join if you aren't already a member of one of the participating organizations that we listed at the beginning, and they are all listed on our website if you didn't get a list of everything, in order to get your native gardens on the map. Or consider volunteering directly with Chicago Living Corridors. We are all volunteers. We don't have a paid staff, so we always have room for additional volunteers to help us spread the word. Thank you so much for joining us. Now we have time for some questions from, if we have any posted. Iris, are you going to do, oh, yeah, oh yes, very important. Our program in October, on October 14th, same time, a Wednesday evening at 7 p.m. is called Landscaping for Birds. And Lisa Meyer is a very avid birder, and she will help you understand that just as Brandie did with what should you plant for bumblebees, we can have a program on looking at what is good to attract which kind of birds to your yard. So that's October 14th. So we hope you'll join us again for that. If you can stay on and have questions, we can go into having time for that a few minutes now.
Yes. Thank you both, Peggy and Brandie. Really, really interesting presentation. I also dropped the registration link for next month's webinar into the chat box, so you can follow that link there. We've had a couple of questions submitted, and feel free if you have time to stay on to submit some other questions. First one, Brandie, is can you identify native bees by their buzz or the sound that they make?
You know, that's such an interesting question. I love that question because I have wondered that myself, and I have noticed a different note to different species. For example, that large, robust Bombasaura comus that I pointed out has a lower hum to it. I've heard that some of them have the note, the high C. I don't know if that's true. I haven't tested it myself, but I'm getting so good like at my bee chasing that if I hear a certain note, I can tell it's a honeybee. I can just tell because I've seen so many of them while I'm out there. And a lot of times if it's a more robust, large queen, bigger bee, they have a lower hum to them than the smaller versions of that type of bee. But I guess just getting out there and exposing yourself to them more and more over time, you do start to notice different notes that some have. But I don't think my range is very far. I can only, probably tell from a couple. But that's a good question. I like that.
Okay, next trivia question here. Do bumblebees make honey?
Okay, that's a good question too. They work more on immediacy. You look at honeybees and they hoard their resources that they collect, and they do outcompete our native bees, which I talked about. And that's where you get the honey from, because they're collecting all of the resources within the range that their nest covers. But bumblebees work more from immediacy and what their immediate needs are. And so that's why the queens urgently need to fuel up as soon as they wake up from torpor in the spring. And those resources that we plant really help them a lot. But they do make these, if you were to look at a bumblebee nest, it's a lot more messy than what you think of a honeybee nest looks like. They have these little pots that they will collect I believe they make it out of the pollen that they collect, and then inside of it, they'll put the nectar that they collect. And so there'll be these little balls within a messy looking nest that they have.
Okay. Are more native bees solitary or colony nesters?
Okay. I'm, still firming up my knowledge on that, but I know you have a whole world of solitary bees, which I'm pretty sure it could be about 70%, and then social bees, which are 30%. Solitary, most bees are really of the diversity of all the bee species that exist. Most are solitary, and the female, the life cycle is very, very different than even the social bees that like a bumblebee or a honeybee. But there, some other, like if you've seen those metallic green sweat bees, they tend to be social, or they'll live in aggregations or communities. But the majority are very non-threatening, I'll just say non-aggressive, solitary bees.
Okay, thanks. One of the commenters says her husband is afraid of bees. Do you have any tips to encourage him, because she wants to make her yard more bee friendly?
Oh, that's a great question, because so many people really are. Like, if you just don't have that experience exposing yourself out there, I can just say from my own perspective, I mean, I haven't observed any aggressive bumblebee behavior. I haven't pushed the limits too much by going too close to nests or anything like that. But with all these years I've been doing the bee chasing, I'm like right there looking right at them, and they are just focused on their job. They are not looking to get me. They're not known for being aggressive at all, unless you threaten them in some way by going too close to their nest and what have you. Some bumblebee species have a little more reputation maybe for being aggressive if you go near a nest. But to get over the fear, it's just, I guess I would say, just time spent outside. I know this is going to sound really radical, but my mother came over recently with and this really does sound, she's very eccentric, but she came with a squirt bottle and some Gatorade water, and she just squirted it around. And of course, this time of year, we all know there's yellow jackets everywhere. They're getting very hungry. They're looking for food. And boy, we just had a plume of them all around us. And it challenged me to sit there with them swarming all around me and not be swatting at them or anything. None of us got stung at all. I think it could be like a deep down innate little fear that some people really have, and it's a legitimate thing. But my advice would be just do your best to push through that fear and get over it, because they're really not after you. You know, I've not been stung yet by a bumblebee, at least bumblebees in particular.
I would just like to add, I have found that people call anything that buzzes a bee, and in
Yeah.
most of the cases when they're being stung, they're wasps or they're hornets. They're not bees
That's
that are
right. That's amen. That's so true. Yeah, there's a lot of education needed, and that's, you know, why I think I'm motivated to continue on with Midwest Native Bee Alliance, just to help people. I noticed at expos that I do, that's a very legitimate question that comes up quite often, and I just try to talk people down. You know, it's really just something that it's possible to get over, and maybe just going on more hikes, getting yourself out there more. You just naturally just get more comfortable in that environment.
Okay. Speaking of stings, someone is asking, when you do get a bee sting, is it a single sting or multiple stings?
Okay, that's a good question. Honeybees, I think, can only sting you once and then they die, but bumblebees can sting you over and over again. So I watched one YouTube video of an unfortunate man who tried to move a bumblebee nest, and he didn't go about it in the right way. He was coming from a honeybee perspective, and he should have done it very differently, and he got really messed up. And I don't recommend that. So yeah, they can sting over and over again. I haven't had experience with that, thankfully.
And another person wrote in that Doug Talamy really changed her mind from having a fear of things like bees to having a lot more respect.
Respect is, amen. I agree wholeheartedly with that. Really, the more I've gone down this rabbit hole and just read all the books I've read now, you know, and just observed them doing what they do, and knowing, you know, it's a free service they're providing humanity, what they do, and they just, you know, do it so naturally. It's a beautiful thing that they're providing a beautiful service for humanity, and definitely deserve a little more respect in that area. So for what they do.
Yeah. Are yellow jackets bees or wasps?
Yellow jackets are wasps. They are not a bee. And so, you know, oftentimes I guess, you know, that's like a whole nother lesson. It's like bee anatomy and all of that. But you'll notice bees tend to have more fuzziness to them, furriness. Not all of them. I mean, some of them, but they definitely have hair on them that make them much better at pollinating, because they're picking up pollen from one flower, taking it to another, and they're just really efficient at what they do. Whereas wasps, yellow jacket is kind of in that wasp category. They are carnivorous. They will eat other insects.
Okay. And then last question here is, are wasps facing similar issues of endangerment as wild bees?
I wish I could answer that. I guess I don't know the answer to that. I have to suspect that they are, when you look at all of the statistics about the impacts pesticides are having on our insects in general, where we're seeing insects decline. That's impacting the birds. You see birds decline. So I don't think, you know, I guess I wouldn't be surprised. I just have never seen actual study, because I'm just so focused on bees. You know, I wish I could answer that with more certainty, but my hunch is they would be experiencing similar declines, since they are part of the overall ecosystem that all kind of is connected and works together for the greater good, you know. So yeah.
I might add to that, Brandie, that if when you're buying plants try not to buy them from the big box stores because most of those plants are treated with pesticides and they are systemic so that I mean, yes, they get rid of the bad bugs, but they get rid of the good ones too. And so if you buy native plants from a native plant sale or from a reputable garden store, they will not have been treated with pesticides. And that the prevalence of people using those is part of the reason that we've had such a die-off of the native insects.
That's true, so true. And your website has a great resource of all the various suppliers and native plant suppliers in our area. I was noticing that. That's really nice.
And we try to keep that up to date in the spring when most of the sales are happening, so that you know what dates they're happening and so forth. Yeah,
that's nice.
Well, thank you all for participating.
Yeah, thank you.
I think I don't remember how many we had. 80 some people in our audience today. Thank you very much, Brandie. It was very good to have you join us this evening. I hope everybody learned some things and have some enthusiasm for increasing your habitat for bees. And we look forward to seeing you next month in October.
Bye, thank you.